All right, hi everyone. I'm going to go ahead and get started. My name is Lauren Dixon. I work for the Central Arkansas Library System as the digital literacy programmer. Every single month, I try to release a program with a new upcoming author. And while Kenny isn't a new author, he has released other books. We are here today to talk about one of his newest books, Becoming the Instrument. So, Kenny, we're so glad to have you here. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for inviting me.
Of course. So if you just want to go in, of course, tell the audience a little bit more about yourself.
Sure. I thought I'd try to do a brief history here to tell you how I got to this point of writing this book. First of all, I could be considered a new author because I've only written one other book and it was 26 years ago. So, you know, I think I could, that the timing has expired. So I'm again a new author. It's simple. I started playing music at 7. By 9, I was playing professionally. And at 11, I actually had a record out and I was on TV shows, and it looked like there was going to be a pop kind of, pop prodigy. But then that didn't happen. And I just went through the normal thing of playing and studying and spin up to the point where I was rather accomplished. You know, it's like somewhere in the, late 70s, 80s. And I had a way of teaching, which I wasn't even intentionally doing, that seemed to lift the veil from people's eyes, how they were blocking their own brilliance or their own light or their own precision on music, simply by thinking of it as so important and thinking of themselves as worthy or unworthy to play it. And literally a monologue came out of me that grew and grew. I did classes, then I did master classes, then I did retreats, and I'm a musician. I was only used to playing, but this became another viable way for me to express myself and also express what I was doing in the music, but it was also helping other people. Now, from there on, it's a really amazing history, but not a history that we have time to deal with. But after teaching and lecturing, I decided in '96 to write a book that was everything I had gathered already in real time, and it was called Effortless Mastery. And I knew it would be popular because the subject when I was lecturing was extremely popular, like filled up houses more than if I even played, which was kind of strange because people seemed to need this thing that seemed to be coming out of me. So eventually I wrote the book, Effortless Mastery, just to catalog everything that I had come through me in real time, sort of improvisation, that it seemed to be really working as far as being helpful to other people. That book then took me on another level. It went all over the world. It had its own journey. Even today, if I check my email, there could be an 18-year-old or an 80-year-old thanking me for that book, that it changed their life. Or the 80-year-old's probably saying, I wish I had discovered this 50 years ago or whatever. And the 18-year-old is saying, wow, I was totally stuck even going to music school. And then I got a lot of letters from people like actors, artists of other kinds, and then even soldiers. If anybody was a musician, they might have came onto this book. So I don't think a soldier would have found it otherwise, but if they also played drums, they found this book. But then they told me things like this one guy in Iraq was able to put on his coding for weapon WMD when he was in the Iraq War, and was never able to put it on time. And after he read Effortless Mastery, he was putting it on in time. So I'm starting to get the idea that this is a lot more than just a music lesson. And I just kept following what you call the Shakti in Hindu, following this electric energy. Where is it taking me? I'm not trying to take it anywhere. So if someone calls me, it was where I was supposed to be. If I wrote this book, the reason I could depend on it is because I wasn't thinking about writing a book. You know, if I'd studied how to be this kind of quasi-guru for somebody, then I wouldn't trust it myself. But I never had the slightest urge to teach anybody, but it was coming out of my mouth. So now that book led to another 20, 25 years until I'm now the artistic director at Berklee College of Music of the Effortless Mastery Institute. And there's actually a minor in Effortless Mastery, something that Vivian and I hope to recreate in other colleges, because it's not exactly music therapy and it's not for people, it's for musicians. It's like musician heal thyself. You know, all the problems are in the mind, And ways of getting out of them are also in that mind by reprogramming. And I've just been doing that with people and teaching them how to do it for years. And this idea of what else it's related to just kept growing and growing. There, I've done talks at Google, I've done talks, those kind of things. And that's why, if I should show this, I don't know if I should, that's the book, Becoming the Instrument. But the subtitle is really the most important factor. Lessons in Self-Mastery from Music to Life. I still don't consider myself a life coach so much as the lessons I learned in music, if you express them a certain way, they are absolutely the sharpest comments on management of life. And I've been using them myself, because whereas I was gifted in a great attitude towards music, I was not particularly gifted in a great attitude towards life. So I've taken the same things and applied them to my own life, plus a lot of help. Teachers, studying Kashmir Shaivism for 30 years, but none of it really had the effect so much as my own homegrown stuff, which I would use that I didn't even think about. For example, musicians know, let's say a jazz musician particularly, that you can't let your hand play and try to tell it where to go. You have to trust it. And that musician knows typically when you trust the hand, it goes the right places. But when you try to guide it, then it can't even play as well as it might have played. That's a great lesson in life. When things are going on in life, are you going to try to manipulate everything? Or are you going to go to what I call the space? Most great musicians play from the space, meaning they're playing, but they're receiving as much as they're not really thinking, what should you play here? They're receiving the next note, and they're trusting, in the case of the piano, they're trusting their hands to be able to do it. Now, that very thing is so analogous to how one deals with their life. Are you taking all the necessary actions without fear, without expectations, and then trusting what the results are? And here's the other thing a musician really has to grow into. If you're trusting, it has to be unconditional trust. And that means sometimes it may not work out and you simply play badly. So then effortless mastery is instant self-forgiveness, because this thing doesn't prove itself, and life is not successful based on only if the choices you make are successful. Life is far more successful if you have an instant mechanism neurologically that you've built that is generous towards yourself at the precise moment of failure. You know, it can't be before failure and it can't be 2 weeks after. It's nice to develop, and it is a neural pathway. Like as you fail, a new neural pathway is saying, but forgive yourself, because that's the best way to get back on track as soon as possible. A lesson that I'm teaching as what, a doctor of psychology, which I'm not, but I learned it absolutely through music. So a lot of the theme of this book is very, very honed in lessons that musicians know. And in most cases, they can't express it. Like I had a dual ability, which was weird. Not only did I play that way, which many, if you've been inspired by a musician, they're doing what I described in Becoming the Instrument, but they never discuss it or they don't have the words for it. So I had this weird kind of ability to speak in 2 languages. Music, everybody would feel everything from the music, but then I could actually describe it and they would feel it again. The important thing that's happened in recent years is that what I've described can be taught and it can be learned. And with a patient practice, incrementally, a person can change their mind. Now, this is not new information, but coming from me, it's totally organic. It's not coming from the study of how to change your mind. It's not coming from the study of psychology. And because it's not erudition, I trust it. It comes through as deep common sense, and it saves me at the appropriate times. I'm not talking in music, because in music, I don't need saving. I put my hand on the instrument, and I actually have a neural pathway that has just told me I am light. I am everything everyone else is. You know, as a musician, you start to get comfortable with the fact that there's a light within you, and that light makes choices of sounds. As a person, we typically presume there is no light, that we are only as powerful as our circumstances. If we have a good job, that's sort of a identity that contributes to a positive identity. If we have a family and they love us, but if they don't love us, or we make big mistakes, or we lose our job, our basic identity as human beings gets downgraded. And as a musician, or as I would say, the things I developed to deal with myself, I said to myself, there is no failure in music. The abject failure is a total success. Now that works for me. So much later in life, after I saw it work for other people, I actually tried it for myself in life. And yeah, it works. But you have to kind of go through the hot coals first of understanding that failure, the worst part of failure is how bad you feel about yourself. So if one was going to retrain their mind, they'd like to retrain their mind to remove circumstances or consequences as relevant. So in other words, in music, you take this choice and you make that choice. And it's successful because that's a choice you made. You have to regard it as successful. In life, a lot of people have atrophy to make choices because they want to know before they made that choice that they made the right choice. Well, I did that for 40 or 50 years in my life, and it was really restricting until I finally followed my own advice. I said, from now on, I define success as having made a choice, not the resultant success or failure of the choice. What an opening in my own heart to know, well, I made the choice, now I'm done thinking about it. And the ability to move out of what I call the conscious mind, otherwise known as some foul language I use, because that's where all the doubts, fears, what ifs, slave to consequences, hostage to consequences, changing your own value of yourself by how successful the outer conditions of life are going. This is a hostage crisis. And I wish it for everyone that I talk to or that reads the book, that it lasts a lot shorter than it did for me, because I can measure it not in years, but decades. So I would hope that people, even as young as yourself, for example, with the right practice, can make that kind of qualifying and quantifying of one's own identity, outgrow it sooner than later. And there are things to practice. And the distance between a philosophy that you absolutely believe in, but how you actually behave, can be covered by practice. For example, you might believe that mistakes are great. There's a very popular statement these days. Oh, mistakes, you should love your mistakes, right? Anybody can say it, but the people, very few can do it. So maybe you're a person that believes for spiritual growth, I want to love my mistakes, but the next time you make one, you actually hate yourself. So what is the moat you have to swim across, or the bridge you have to make between a philosophy that you know is true and wish you could do, but how you actually act? And the answer, as in anything else, like learning to play the piano, is practice. We kind of want this stuff to just work, but you cannot reprogram your mind without practices any more than you could play the piano. And you might give the greatest lecture on how to play the piano, but you will never be a step closer if you're not practicing it. And I find retraining the mind is absolutely the same thing. So a few practices that I'm revealing in this book, which are updated, I keep making them simpler and simpler, because I find that the ego can talk us out of anything. You may find a path that works, but after 3 months, it doesn't feel like it's working. So the ego says, it's not working, man. And you stop. But what would have happened after 6 months? What would have happened after 6 years? What if you practiced something without a destination and just decided you would practice it, like brushing your teeth? If a person practiced an instrument with as little sense of need to progress as they brush their teeth, they would only progress. They would never stand still, because the practicing is not predicated on needing, I played good, I played bad. The practicing is its own reward. And that value system needs to be practiced. So I'll give you an example of the easiest exercise I've come up to date. I consider the problems to be in what I've called the conscious mind. Let's just say it's a room filled with worms or vines, each one of them its own thought, and each one of them you're trying to negotiate with, and each one of them you're not doing very well because, frankly, the mind is smarter than I am. And by just separating myself from the mind, I've already externalized it, which gives me the possibility to ask this question: if I am not my mind, who am I? That opens the door to a host of spiritual possibilities if you want it. Otherwise, you can look at it as neurological possibilities. The fact is, the one who is the object of all these thoughts is a really tortured person, or at least finds himself having a hard time on a day when there's nothing wrong. How many of you that are watching us now, how many of you have struggled on a day when there's actually nothing wrong, because everything you're thinking about is either in the past or the future? Those days add up to years. And then it's rare that, I'm proud of myself for evolving to the point where at least on a day where there's nothing wrong, there's nothing wrong. And I'm in the moment. The big idea of the 21st century is not to be trapped in the past and the future. It is to be in this moment without thought. To me, that would be the dominant religion of the 21st century, because all people do is think and put themselves in situations. There are no answers when you ask yourself questions that have to do with the future. And that alone makes us start to feel weak and afraid. So how do we get out of this room of worms and into what I call the space? Well, it was always about the breathing, but what I'll demonstrate is the easiest way yet. Think of breathing not as any subtext for spirituality or psychology, but simply, if this is a machine, becoming the instrument, you become the instrument that plays the instrument. Neither instrument has an ego. Neither instrument has desire. It just does what it does. This instrument has a little gizmo in the middle, somewhere around here, that breathes. The object is, for say 20 seconds, to remove your attention from what you're thinking about and simply watch this little machine breathe. And let's try it. So in a moment, I'm going to say go. And when I say stop, you just stop doing it. But remember, you're only locating part of the body and focusing on it for 20 seconds. So here we go. Focus on, become aware of the breathing machine. Go. And stop. So there's several innovations to that, where meditation isn't really fit for a lot of people, because I myself do not consider myself to be a great meditator. But if I just watch my breath, I might slip into meditation next. But here's the thing: if you say to somebody, watch your breathing for 5 minutes, they won't really get there, because 5 minutes seems like 5 days. That's the ego. But if I said 20 seconds, anybody could drop their life for 20 seconds, knowing that you can have all your drama back, all your neurosis in 20 seconds. So sure, I'm going to watch myself breathe. Now that's the other thing. If you were really just watching this little thing breathe, you weren't thinking. You cannot think while you're watching yourself breathe, and you cannot watch yourself breathe while you're thinking. And even if you think, wow, I'm not thinking, you're no longer watching yourself breathing. So a thought is a thought, and it pulls you away. But the simple thing of watching breathing, like if I looked out the window, let's say I happen to live in the country, but if I was living in the city, there's traffic. There was traffic there before I looked out the window. I just watched it for 20 seconds. And when I look away, the traffic continues. In that sense, you've been breathing all your life. So it's not an exercise of doing something you've never done, but perhaps watching it for a short time and then noticing when I'm watching my breathing, I can talk and watch myself breathe at the same time. There's just a bigger space between sentences. But when I actually watch my breathing, I tend to waste less words. I tend to not think ahead. And I feel absolutely situated in this moment. It is the goal of meditation, but it can keep, what I say is this: don't try to change your mind in a day, because your mind is smart. It'll use that and it'll defeat you. And then you'll think, I'm never going to change. But you can always interrupt it. You can always take a break. So my mind is saying blah, blah, blah. Everything your mind is saying is age appropriate, where you might be thinking about whatever, at what age you are. You look very young to me, actually. You look like you're in your teens. So if you're not, are you?
I'm 20.
20, well.
Close.
It's on the borderline. No, what I'm saying is whatever's happening in your life, these are the thoughts that come through to you. What's relevant to you. This is how you try to keep yourself safe. This ego thing is actually trying to do something good. If I figure out what I'm going to do with my next part of my life, that's going to make me feel safe, because now I know what I'm going to do. The problem is more often than not, you don't come up with answers. You just come up with questions that don't have answers. And those questions that don't have answers leave a void. And that void makes one feel uncomfortable or insecure. Not only does it ruin that, because you can't answer questions that don't have answers, but it also ruins the moment. So if I ask, let's say I was 20 and my big question was, am I ever going to be a successful musician? Because that would be age appropriate. I'm pretty successful, so that wouldn't be a question that would occur to me. So if I ask myself that question, when I feel good, the answer is yes. And when I feel bad, the answer is no, which tells me I don't have the answer yet. But if I ask myself that question today, I could be preoccupied all day. And not getting the answer, it does the most damaging thing. It ruins this moment. And this helps you, if you want to you can't change the thoughts, but you can take a break. So let's say I'm going through, oh, my mind's doing that. This is the script. My mind's doing that again. Am I going to be successful? Then you go, oh, I could just be, because you're observing it, you're already in a bit of a heightened place. Then when you wake up and the mind goes, I'm a piece of you know what. If it's sitting here, you can't see it. All you think is that's what you think you are, because that's what you're thinking. But if you understand the principle that the mind does its own thing and you are something greater than that, and you wake up and you say, I'm a piece of blah, and you go, okay, that's what the mind is saying today. Thank you for sharing, but I'm going to live in today and just see what's up today. If you had the ability to do that, you could keep out the threat of the future and the disappointment of the past and just see what's happening today. Well, musicians that are successful do that whenever they play, but they may not be able to describe it. And it's not just musicians. And that's why this book, I think, is more relevant to anybody who's doing anything. But if they contemplate it, if they find the thing that they're mostly fighting against is their thoughts, then this is the book. Because once you learn, what you do is the thoughts are coming and go, okay, here we go again. I've gone down that road. Never really ends well. Like that's my script, right? That never ends well. Like wondering if I'm going to be, now at this age, wondering if my heart's going to be good, wondering if Social Security is cool. Everything is age appropriate. And I go, okay, worrying about things that I have no control over, that never ends well. I can't stop it because my mind is smarter than I am, but I'll take a break for 20 seconds. And I have to even say 20 seconds, because if I don't remind myself that I'm going to drop everything, but it's going to be really short, then I won't actually drop everything. So right now, I'll say it to you. For 20 seconds, completely drop anything in your head, including the fact that I'm talking. Go back to that little machine and watch yourself breathe. Go. Sometimes I realize how delicious it is to breathe just because I finally observed it. And that's the gift to me of teaching it to others, that I do it more and stop. And if you keep doing it, it's like planting a seed, and that seed grows into a pathway where you can stop the negative or the self-judgment. Self-judgment is an epidemic, but it's been here a long time. Self-judgment is probably 100 to 200 years old, because I would say to develop the industrial age is to start judging yourself by what you do. And, you know, if you say you're a musician, great. But as soon as you become a musician or you go to music school, this annoying question comes up. Am I a good musician? That's one of the questions that you would go, okay, there's no sense in trying to answer that now. And I can't stop it, but I'll take a break. For 20 seconds, I'm going to watch myself breathe. And then I'm happy to go back to the uselessness of asking myself if I'm a good musician. Now, when you take that break, often the power of that previous thing is gone, or weak, or you can't even find it. So accidentally, a person who's not a trained anything, I think I found a way to interrupt the flow of self-judgment and negative assessment of oneself. This interruption, if you really watch yourself breathe, you have the relief of not having these clouds overhead. And that develops into a lot of interesting things. Without clouds over your head, you may suddenly realize how bright the light is in your soul or in your life. You may realize that I'm not doomed to any kind of thing, that I can rewrite the whole story every day by getting into the space. And the act of doing it just makes you more and more accessible, not tomorrow and not yesterday. This moment becomes more accessible because this thing I did has blossomed into a neural pathway. If I think, I'll watch myself breathing for 20 seconds, the previous problem's pretty much gone. It may come back later. I may apply it again. But it really is the crux of how you undo something, and it leads to a reprogramming. First for musicians, then it was for artists. I mean, then I got a call from a seminary school. It was required reading. So, you know, we don't know when we have a message of value, but if we're the ones that didn't know it, I think you can trust it even more than if we've always wanted to be a person with a message of value. I don't trust that as much as I just wanted to play, but this stuff was coming out of my mouth. So I guess I'll leave it there. That's about a half an hour. Would you recommend that? That's a good point?
Yeah, that was a fantastic bit of information. I even found, I'm 20, but I'm in grad school right now. Just recently decided to change majors. And so even just got a lot on my brain, and just taking that 20 seconds, and you're right, anybody can just, even during this, take 20 seconds to just focus on your breathing. And I had no just anxious, overreaching thoughts during that time. That was very freeing feeling. And now I almost feel like I can focus on this more. I was already focused on it, but now there's no overlooming, you know, you need to think about this, you need to think about that, you know, have you checked this application since then?
When you do it again, and you can do it anytime, because one of the things I think about it is so portable. You could be anywhere doing anything. Remember a couple of things. Keep it to 20 seconds so you don't grow expectations. What the ego does is try to expand it so then you don't feel like you can do it. Leave the meaning of it to be minimal. Its help is profound, but not if you think it's something special. So you go, hey, I'm already breathing. I think I'll watch myself breathe for 20 seconds. Now, if you can keep it that sort of light, you'll find it starts to become something you can apply. When? Who knows? But from the space, who cares?
Yeah, that's fantastic advice. I have problems with just overthinking about everything. So it does seem like the next book that I will be checking out from the library is going to be your book. It sounds like you've got a lot of great messages in there, even though I'm not a musician, I'm not an artist, but it sounds like a lot of the principles and practices that you have in becoming the instrument is something that almost everyone can benefit from.
Everybody would rather be the instrument than the player, because if you're the instrument, there might be another part of your brain that works through you that's much more efficient than you trying to generate efficiency, or much more wise than you trying to generate wisdom, or much better at taking tests. You know what I mean? I mean, there's a part of us that's, I think you could say it's part of the superconscious, or the difference between individual mind and universal mind. Those things are covered in different chapters. To know that there's a totally inspired part of you that's as consistent as the fact that you're breathing. You don't breathe occasionally, and you don't have inspiration occasionally, but you're blocked from it. And that's why you only have it very occasionally. But you don't realize that it exists there like the traffic, whether you're looking at it or not. And so these are the things that's more of like addition by subtraction. What's in the way of what might light me up today and cause me to take the next action instead of waiting for the right time to take the next action? It may have something to do with you applying to grad school, unless you've already done it, but that could be more of a strain because of your attachment to it.
Right. Well,
Rather than
my
saying,
issue
I just
is,
filled out a form, success.
yeah, my issue is I was already in grad school, and then, you know, a semester in, I decided that my major wasn't what I was interested in pursuing anymore. And I had that battle of conflict within myself of, well, I've already been accepted. If I were to withdraw, you know, this could happen and this could happen. But I also had to take a step back and think, I'm not going to be happy in this if I get my master's in this degree that I was originally pursuing. So I had to submit my applications to different schools and new programs. But like,
You did it.
that's out of my control. All I can do is submit the applications, do my best, and then just wait.
But there's something you can do during the waiting. Whenever you think about it, go back and watch yourself breathe, because you remind yourself that you don't want to become more attached while you want to use this as an opportunity to be able to detach at will. I took the action. The rest of it's actually not up to me. So every time I think about it, I'm diminishing the possibilities of this moment. And I think you're right there.
There's a question from the audience. Jessica is asking, this message is new to me, but I'm very interested in learning more about it. Which of the two books should I delve into first? Effortless Mastery and
Is she a
Becoming the
musician? If she's a
I don't know.
musician, I think Effortless Mastery really, like, you know, the idea that anybody should have to be taught how to receive the light of playing music just goes to show how much of the ego is taking up real estate in the mind, because the mind is wonderful, but yet, you know, like I said, Effortless Mastery, separate, or I don't know if I did say it, but separate the body from the mind. Now you can train the body to play, but you have to separate the mind from the ego, or it won't leave you alone while you do it. And that'll be going to grad school or doing anything. If you just do what you have to do, and the issue of how it's going to work out is something you've taught yourself not to think about, then you're just going to be applying yourself to the issue of the moment and what you have to do. Some people can't do homework because they think of how much homework they have to do. But from the space, you only have to do one thing. And the rest of the things don't exist because they're not in your field of view, because you're in the space and you're seeing the thing you're working on, and you don't see the next thing until you're done with that. And if you don't have the patience to be in the space anymore, that's a good time to take a break. There's a place of absolute concentration. And instead of thinking it's a place you have to work at getting, it is a place you drop things and you surrender into, but you have to be shown that, you have to show that to yourself. That moment you had when you watched yourself breathe is the you without consequences. And it's incredibly more intelligent, ready to react, ready to improvise, than the you that's always weighing the consequences. So if she's a musician, maybe it is good to read. If she's a musician who has held herself back, read Effortless Mastery. It's now helped many thousands of people to take that yoke off their neck. If it's about life, I really think this is the book, because all the important points of Effortless Mastery are there, but they show how many ways that you can be the most self-generous while you're dealing with the outer circumstances. How to fall into the space. Being in the space is being in this moment. Anybody can use that for anything. And being in this moment without thoughts. So I hope that answers it. It really depends on the two situations.
And then just to interject, if any of the audience members have any questions, feel free to put them in chat. But in the meantime, I've also prepared some questions talking a little bit about your life as a musician as well as writing your book. Is that all right with you?
Sure.
Okay, so you had mentioned that you were playing professionally by age 9. How did you even get into playing piano? You know, what was the role of music in your early years?
Well, I think the role was being noticed. You know, I went to a friend's birthday party at 7, and his father played piano for us. And I had seen piano on television many times. I never actually stood right there, nose to the piano was right there. My nose was right there. I never saw that before. And I ran home and I said to my parents, get me a piano. And they rented a Wurlitzer with an option to buy, you know. This is actually stories in my book, first book, Effortless Mastery. And I found I had a lot of talent for it. I could figure out stuff before I knew what I was doing. And I actually walked into the kitchen after just plunking out some pop tunes I knew. And I said to my mom, good news, Mom, I won't be needing those lessons. I just figured out how to play. So it's really weird that I would have so many strategies for people that don't have that self-support and confidence. But the reason I do is because music came so easy to me that life became that much harder for me because it didn't come as easy as music. I had this thing that was so easy. All I had to do was will myself to play better. And then I did. But then in life, if I had to take a math class or language, there was no particular talent there. And I was completely ill-equipped. So over my lifetime, I started to teach and I started to see things in people that was holding them back, even though those particular things were never a big deal with me, but I recognized them because that's what I did when it was an issue over taking a class or life or making a decision. It's really a weird way, the way it kind of came together. But anyway, after that, I really didn't have, I went to first Manhattan School of Music as a concert piano major, which was a joke. I really didn't care about it, but I got in, you know. I too realized that that was the wrong thing. Then I went to Berklee College of Music. I wasn't even so much of a jazz fan as I knew I was an improviser. Whatever that meant, someone told me at this school they improvised. I said, great, let me go there. From there, I met the people that probably led to every, 6 degrees of separation, including Vivian, everybody I've ever met since, because it started with the teachers I met there. Some of my friends there are still friends and who I met playing with them and so on and so forth. And I've played with the greatest musicians in the world. And I'm a composer too. We're going on a little trip late April. I have Vivian singing on one of my pieces, but with the Metropole Orchestra and the Tbilisi Orchestra in Georgia. So we'll see if Georgia, Russia. So we'll see if that gig's still on. Obviously, but I don't know. It's not a thought I need to work on today, but that's what we're doing. And, for me, it's almost a month of performing my compositions. And, I'll really look forward to it because during your whole pandemic, definitely over 2 years, I've taught and lectured way more than I've played. So it'll kind of be fun to just be out there playing again. But that's how I got into it. And in the early time, and probably to this day too, I don't know how many musicians feel this way, and I don't know how many musicians would admit it, but it was more about being noticed, being respected, really held like a special person by people than anything else, to tell the truth. And the problem with that is then you develop a personality glitch where if you're not being treated special, you don't feel like you're even being treated right. So there are people with that problem. And I've had that problem for a long time. In order to realize that the self-love has to be supplied by me and not idolatry or people love what I played or love what I said, that can't be it. I did grow out of that, but it took few decades. If I walked in and I played and then people didn't notice it, I would feel bad. So, but it led me to some truths. Today, I would say what might be unique about me, not what I do, but in terms of what I think about, I might be one of the few musicians, if not the only musician, that is more interested in the issue of what's going on in my mind, what's my mindset, than even the music. I really don't think about the music a lot because I've now had decades of demonstration that when the mind is in the right place, the music is in an incredibly authentic place and solid. So more and more, I got more interested in what takes you out of the right mindset, and that's pretty unique because I think most musicians, no matter how philosophical they are, they'll still say it's about what the music sounded like. And I give the least amount of thought to that, but I never, don't seem to be ever disappointed. The music is great. And someone says that was, and if there's something about my music that's different than everyone else's, it might be exactly that. I'm resting in a space and appreciating whatever my hands want to play. And that's pretty rare.
Well, how important, at least for musicians, like I mentioned, I'm not a musician, but I'm sure this is a really important concept. How important would you say it is for musicians to get into the headspace of just being in the moment and, doing what they feel the best doing instead of stressing out about how it sounded afterwards? How do you recommend people go about getting out of that?
I mean, how important it is and how people go about, that's two questions.
Right.
So, and they are separate. How important is it? I'd say it's a deal breaker. If your life is about how did I do today and how am I doing tomorrow, you're usually just, you're usually teaching, you're not performing much. Because the only time you feel secure is when you're teaching somebody else. But when it's time for you to perform, you're going through all this shit that you wish you weren't going. Sorry, that's what I was trying not to say before. That you wish you weren't going through. And that's called performance anxiety. Sometimes people are relieved from that by doing what they now call music therapy. And that's just a different mindset. In your mind, you're playing, but you're trying to help somebody. I tell somebody, you don't have to do music therapy. All you have to do is when you're playing in Carnegie Hall, do music therapy. Don't think of yourself as performing. So again, it's a change of mindset. But how to do it? Practices like what I'm revealing in Becoming the Instrument will be practices in taking your mind out of the preoccupation with how good you sound and putting it into the space where you're ready to accept and appreciate whatever sound you make. But if it really is the musician only, I would again say the strongest first book would be Effortless Mastery. We lost your audio.
Sorry, I was muted. So somebody was unable to chat in on this, but they did email me and they were asking if you think it's important that they have to go to a music school like Berkeley, or if just being self-taught is enough to become proficient enough to perform in a similar capacity to you, not necessarily like what you do, but just performing professionally.
Well, I mean, I am really ensconced in Berkeley. I think it's one of the most progressive places in the world, spiritually and musically. It's amazing. And they've given me all the space to do what I do. But truly, I believe if you have a teacher that knows what they're doing and knows the music and plays it and knows how to coach, there's always too much teaching and not enough coaching. If I show you one thing, then I'm going to keep showing you that thing until I hear that you have own it. Because one of the things that happens in music school, but private teachers are quite capable of it as well, is you give them something, they barely play it. Now you give them something else. What's the message? I barely play the piano? No, I want to see ownership, and I know what ownership looks like. So if you're studying with me, which I don't do anymore privately, but anybody that would be an effortless mastery music teacher, which we're starting to cultivate. Vivian is the first, but I'm hoping we do teachers trainings. The big difference is if I'm teaching you something and you don't own it, then we're going to go back and learn it again, because you have to know that access is within you. And the way they traditionally teach, you have only enough time to learn something to barely play it. And then people grow up with that's the way they play. They kind of barely play. So it's my belief, the hardest thing is finding a teacher like that. But after that, if you have a little posse, a little group of people that like to play, and you play the music you're all trying to learn, and I think that's probably as direct as anything. The problem is when people are alone, they often lose their momentum and they fall into sort of a void where they know what they should do, but they're not doing it. Or they know they could be doing it, It's hard to get that alone unless you do this work on yourself alone. Say, I'm in the space, like let's say there's someone in that person's town that they'd like to play with. But if they're in the conscious mind, they go, but maybe that person wouldn't like to play with me. Therefore, they never make the phone call. But if they say, they get into the space, I'm going to call this guy, because if we could just play a couple times a week, it would really make me play better. And if he doesn't want to, then I'll offer him lunch. You like Chinese food? Or I'll pay him. But don't pay. I mean, I would rather pay someone to play with me if I was trying to learn how to do it than almost teach. So I would say it's very direct, and it is very possible for someone to learn it without leaving their place. I think you need people to play with, and you need a really great teacher to sort of guide you through the waters. It's possible, but I do think that school is a great, it's a challenge. And you need actually a course like what we teach, because you need to know that not all the courses deserve the same amount of attention. And that if some courses are not relevant to your life, then don't take them personally. Just play the game and do the best you can. But you need to be able to sort through that and have somebody sort of guide you, but you need to do this next. It's not that easy a question to just answer. I think it's possible to become a great musician faster just being home, if you can set up the right little, a scene for yourself. But, it's not as, but it's possible. Absolutely. Let me just leave it there.
So at least with the kind of, to just ask another question on your point, with the rise of the pandemic, in your opinion, do you think it's better for people to try to play together in person, or would, like an over Zoom format be better if people could reach, say somebody lives here in Arkansas, but they want to connect with a musician in California where you're at? Do you think Zoom is still a viable option, or is playing in person the best way to do it?
Playing in person is always the best thing to do. And you don't want that to become out of fashion because of this constant pandemic, which we're not even sure we're really, what's going to happen. But the problem also is technological. From what I understand, there's some really kind of boutique technology, but the way most of this goes is that there's a delay between one person playing and another. So the other thing is each person would have to have really great audio set up, or else they'd notice that their sound got knocked, that person's sound got knocked out when they played. Zoom is not really the technology for that. I believe such technology exists. And what you see a lot of times that you don't realize is that everybody recorded their part alone. Then they put it on a track so that it looks like everybody's playing together, but in fact, they're not. So if everybody can afford great technology and great audio thing, I guess it's good, but I think there's nothing like being in the room playing with people. And I hope that never, just for health reasons, never becomes a thing of the past.
Yeah, and then I also had some questions about your book writing process. So I know you mentioned your first book was kind of a conglomeration of the lessons that you've learned up to a certain point, and then your newer book is some more life lessons that you've learned. So what were some things that you learned about yourself while you were writing the book? Did you find that you knew more about yourself after writing it, or did you know even less about yourself?
Well, first of all, the process of writing, I was not an author when I wrote Effortless Mastery. What I did was, but I am an improviser. So as I did these lectures, the lectures got longer and longer. Sometimes I would be at a retreat, I'd be talking like hours a day for 5 days. And as Vivian can tell you, I never really run out of things to say, but that stuff became very codified. So in the end, I recorded a 3-day retreat in Denmark with the Danish Musicians Union. And I just made sure I said everything that I say, including the meditations. And then I got a computer, because at that time I didn't have one yet. And I just started transcribing the tapes. And first, every subject, of course, I kept going back to the same subjects. Those would go in certain folders with a name, and those folders eventually became chapters. So I think I took real-time lecturing and turned it into a book. Of course, there was a lot of editing I did, but I didn't have to come up with stuff to say. By the time I wrote Becoming the Instrument, I was more of an author. I'm not a fiction author, but I could write a book today. And again, there was a lot of real-time stuff that came up. So I felt like but I didn't have to record it. I could access a lot of the stuff that I was saying. So I did just sit down and write it. And it got written very fast, almost finished. I started in November of 2016. It was almost finished by January 2017, because I had gained so much more insight since the first book. But then, so a story which is actually in the book, I'll try to tell it quickly. Before I finished the book, I had an appointment scheduled to go to India, to this ashram that I've been wanting to go to for a long time, because I go to this ashram in America. but I'd never been to the Indian one, the one in India. So I was really thought, well, it's time. It's not like I can't finish the book. I have to go. And I spent 3 weeks there, and I thought, this is going to be maybe a great ending for the book, you know? And it felt like it might be. When I came home, to make a long story short, I fell asleep at the wheel one night, had a terrible car crash, walked out of it bleeding in my head profusely, but essentially undamaged. And then a week later, I started experiencing a trauma that was clinical trauma. I mean, I couldn't get out of bed, and I would spend hours just watching myself breathe. Because if I could really focus on it, then I didn't feel this physical anxiety. And then I think, okay, now let's get up and brush your teeth. And the anxiety would wham me again. That's how bad it was. And it continued, as my doctor told me, for 6 or 7 months. And I did everything you can do. So I'm not sure what worked, but as he said, it did end. But when I got done, I was much more into the role of breathing than I had ever been, because I have to say, pain is the greatest motivator to learn things. There's nothing like pain to force yourself to learn. And when I came out, everything I was teaching was much more dedicated on the, much more related to the breathing side than it was before. And of course, breathing was important before. And then, so the whole 2017, I didn't write because I had trouble even just getting out of bed. 2018, I started to write a little bit, but I got very busy again as a teacher and musician. 2019, it was almost finished, but of course it needed a lot of trimming and clearing up. So I was almost done with it by 2019. And then 2020, the pandemic struck. We went home on March 13th from school. That was the day I wish I had invested in Zoom, but I just only thought about it. I didn't do it, you know? But 2 weeks later, the book was done, because suddenly I was home and it only needed rereading and yeah, a few words here and there. And then it still didn't come out until January of 22. And that I could probably write a book about what's happened in my life from 20 to 22. So that's how it didn't come out to 22, but it was really done in 20. But if I hadn't gone to India, it probably would have been done in February of 2017. On the other hand, I think it has some jewels in it that wouldn't have been there otherwise.
Right. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. We would love for, if the last few minutes of this program, if you wouldn't mind playing something for us.
Oh, I don't actually play piano. I'm only kidding. Sure. What would you like to hear?
What is a favorite composition of yours that you haven't had a chance to play in a while?
Well, I mean, anything is a favorite. I can play it whenever I want. But there's a
That's
tune
true.
that I thought was very apropos for all of us that are trying to find our way now.
Mhm.
And it's from West Side Story. It's called Somewhere.
Okay. Yeah, we would love to hear that.
People tend to know it. Let's put the keys on the, focus on the keys. Wait a minute. Sorry, original sound. All right, there we go. That's what Zoom gave us.
That was fantastic. Thank you so much. I don't want to clap too loud, so that way whenever we listen to this again, people aren't just overwhelmed with applause, but that was beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that with us.
Pleasure.
All right, that looks like all the time that we have today. On behalf of the Central Arkansas Library System, I really appreciate both you and Vivian taking the time out of y'all's days to, especially Kenny, sharing your words of wisdom with us, your life story. And we look forward to getting your book into our library system.
That sounds great. Thank
All
you.
right.
The opportunity to share it with everybody.
Amazing.
All right.